right, greetings to all you happily miserable accursed. I'm going to get right to it today because Scott Reid and I are welcoming a friend of the pod, Lisa Raitt, into the guest panelist chair for the next 2 weeks. Let me say that again. Lisa Raitt is here, goddammit. Former longtime MP, former cabinet minister, current vice chair of global investment banking at CIBC. Today on the pod, the RCMP hearings and allegations of interference into the Nova Scotia mass shooting probe. How much political fallout will there be from this? What does the latest Angus Reid poll tell us about the Conservative leadership race, and what are the implications for a general election? Who's ultimately more electable, Poilievre or Charest? Stephen Harper has an opinion about this, and guess what? He ain't shy about it. Our cursed clipping is Robin Urbach's piece in the Globe and Mail on how a savvier NDP could be seizing on the opportunities this summer, but don't seem particularly inclined. And of course, Gordon Pinsent will be here, Beso Profundo, to close the show with our Hey Yous. Lisa, it's great to have you back on the show here. Thanks for not thinking Scott and I were a couple of punters last time and coming back.
I'm delighted to be here. I'll be easier on Scott this time.
Excellent.
Well, let's hope so.
You're in Cape Breton. What's up?
I'm not, actually. I'm still in Milton. Unfortunately, well, just to let you know, my husband's not doing so great in the hospital right now, so I opted not to go to Cape Breton, and I'm just hanging out here until he stabilizes a little bit more. It's Alzheimer's. It's just the way it is, guys.
Well, okay.
It's so rough.
Yeah.
When you say he's not well, I don't mean to intrude, but when you say he's not well, does it mean that just he's agitated?
Yes.
Does it mean that he's getting ill? Okay.
Yep. Behaviors are back and they're significant. And this time he's not in a hospital. He's in long-term care and they are not equipped to deal with it. So and there's no beds in Ontario to deal with it. So I'm back kind of to square one in a sense, but working with the team to try to get the best solution. And we'll get there. But it seems to be coming down, but it's been 11 days now and he's still pretty manic.
Man, it's tough.
Well, what do you do? What is it a medication issue or?
Yes, it's a little bit of both. It's behavioral, so he'll get triggered by stuff, and we can't figure out the trigger. It could be hallucinations, so medication helps relieve the hallucinations. And sometimes it's just triggered by noise, and he gets frustrated and he goes off. And those things can't be medicated. That's chemical restraint. So you've got to deal with it behaviorally. It is a slippery slope, man. It's really tricky to get this right. And the big problem is he's 6'2" and 260 pounds.
Big fella, yeah.
Big fella.
Well, thank you for giving us some share of mind today.
No, this is great. And listen, don't hold back. I mean, everyone's got a cross to bear in life. This is mine. And I'm open about it because I want families to know that this is normal. It's not straightforward at all. Ups and downs.
Right.
So let's proceed and let me make fun of Scott Reid.
Excellent. Okay.
All right.
Well, let's start with this. It's probably not the most important thing of the week, but I'm trying to figure out how important it is. So the commissioner of the RCMP and Bill Blair were both before a House of Commons committee yesterday about allegations of interference into the Nova Scotia mass shooting. Scott, how did that go down from your perspective?
Well, first of all, it happened on a day when Rogers executives appeared before a committee, when the Pope obviously was here providing what is characterized as an apology. And so it didn't get the sort of attention that it would otherwise have gotten. And it's obviously the end of July. I have a different take, one that probably will annoy people, but I thought there was an important takeaway from the committee. It just isn't what lots of people, particularly opponents of the government, were looking for. My takeaway is it puts real doubts in my mind about the commissioner. And I know that sounds like a very direct and personal comment, but when I look at everything, I mean, there was also another senior official evidence came forward, and that individual said, listen, I didn't hear what these other officers out of Nova Scotia heard. I didn't hear any talk of a promise had been made to the government. Bill Blair has been definitive now in a couple of ways, saying there was never any instruction, never any ask to alter the investigation. She said definitively that no one asked her. So if you take them at their word, and I do, then what I conclude is that the RCMP commissioner got on a call with a bunch of investigators who were, in the midst of an unbelievably intense, high-profile and disturbing investigation in Nova Scotia, and she vented. And she spoke imprecisely, inappropriately, and imprudently, and therefore left those that are participating in the call, at least some of them, with the impression that her actions were motivated and her objections were motivated by some kind of political dialogue that occurred. So that caused them to doubt her and her motivations and her professionalism. And it left the government in that awkward spot where you now have to freight what people say they understood about what she said at a call that you weren't present at. And so that's a tough spot for the government. And again, so if you take people at their word, where it leaves me is, why would she speak that way? Why would she speak that way in that circumstance and leave that impression? And it causes me to have real doubts about her judgment. So that's a very personal, very specific take. But as opposed to some grand government scandal, that's where it leaves me. It causes me to wonder about her professionalism and abilities and judgment.
Well, Lisa, I thought Scott left out a fact. And the fact that and maybe I'm wrong, and Scott, if I'm making this up, just tell me I'm making this up. But did the commissioner not say that she had informed the minister that they would be releasing that information? So he didn't ask for it, she says, and he says, but she offered it. Lisa, does that ring true?
I don't think the government has clean hands on this. And I do agree with Scott that the fall person in all this is going to be Brenda Lucki. She's not going to have a job after this is all done because she's lost the confidence of the men and women who serve in the RCMP. Fait accompli. I can't imagine she's going to make it out of this alive. Bill Blair, it's not going to affect him or impact him. It's not going to impact his chief of staff. And I'm a little sad by that. I ran the decision tree for myself in terms of where could this have gone off the rails. For me, Brenda Lucki told the minister's office what kinds of guns were used very soon after they were investigating. And she also indicated, please keep this confidential. Now, somewhere along the lines, somebody asked for this not to be confidential anymore. Was it the chief of staff? Was it Bill Blair? Bill's hands-on. I mean, I'm sure Bill thinks he's the chief of the RCMP, the chief of the chief kind of thing, because that's how Bill Blair works. That is his way. And that's okay, because that's what he's trained to do. So is it beyond the pale that he would ask for it to be made public? No, I don't think so. Is it illegal for him to do it? No. Is it craven politics? Yeah. Is he going to get blamed? And do people care? Probably not. But Brenda Lucki's going to take the fall for it all. And it's just another civil servant who is getting run over by the great Trudeau government bus that had a wonderful career, maybe, or at least a good name, and suddenly gets drawn into a scandal of their own making. And that's it for them. They go off into retirement, and whatever else they may have been able to do as post job is not as lucrative as it could have been.
That's correct, depending on the fact base, right? Like, it all depends upon the facts. It sounds to me like the reason I lay it on her is not because I'm trying to scapegoat a senior civil servant or a senior person in uniform. And goodness knows, I'm willing to be critical of the government. I just, even the decision to early on, as you say, Lisa, inform the chief of staff to the minister, these are the weapons used. By the way, I'm going to be making certain that they're made public. Then she loses her temper and loses her cool on a conference call with investigating officers and saying, well, damn it, now you're not, what do you mean you're not releasing it? I already said that we were going to release it. Now I'm going to have to go back and tell them that I didn't, leaving the impression of political engagement and political motivation. I put that on her. And, now if the minister asked her to release it, first of all, I'm not sure that that's inappropriate, but even, if he was putting pressure on, but he sort of categorically said he hasn't. So I come back to it. I mean, it seems to me on more than one occasion, she's shown misjudgment. Where
did she get the idea, Scott? Where did she get, so there's a change. I'm not going to release the information.
Yeah.
Then she tells them she is going to release the information. What would have changed from her perspective on that? How is it possible she got the idea that that was a good thing to do? So first of all, I would assume that she's thinking, and this is why, again, I question whether or not she's the right person for the job. I'm making this assumption based on all that the officers on the ground had told her, well, we're going to have a press conference. She made an assumption that's going to be released. So then she tells the minister's office it's going to be released. I'm not crystal clear, but she told the chief of staff or the minister first. But it's not standard practice to release it. And she told them she wasn't going to release it. So there was a policy change on her on her part,
right?
That is unexplained.
Yeah.
Well, is it though? I mean, so either people are lying and they asked her to do so, or she conceded, which is inappropriate on her behalf, but also inappropriate for the government to put pressure on her, or she She thought, the smart thing to do here politically, because I got to realize now I'm not just a cop, I'm also in the political world, would be to have that stuff released. So that's going to be helpful to the government's agenda. And I'll make that assumption and I'll push that. So I don't know. Again, if the facts are that she was pressured to do it and she did a volte-face, then there's lots of blame to go around. But based on what we've heard, I look at her and I go like, well, how come you're making these judgments? These look lame to me.
Because she thinks it's going to curry favor, perhaps.
That's right.
Career,
that's
perhaps.
on her, though.
Well, yeah, but here's the thing. And I have the scars of the SNC-Lavalin production with Jody Wilson-Raybould. And for me, the language is important. So what is the minister saying? He's saying, well, we didn't put any pressure. He didn't say we didn't ask. The statement says we didn't put any pressure. And there's a big difference between Zita asking for it and putting pressure on the commissioner. So maybe the commissioner took it upon herself to put more pressure, whatever, but it doesn't.
Especially since this government has, Lisa, degrees of pressure, some of which they consider legitimate and some of which they consider illegitimate. Right?
Is it undue pressure? Is it extreme pressure?
Isn't it also a reasonable question to say, are you not allowed to ask? Like, if you're in the minister's office and you say, okay, so the commissioner calls and volunteers that these weapons were used, and you say, okay, well, is that going to be made public? And I don't know that that's political interference, is it? Is that inappropriate? I mean,
that's you're asking question mark. Yeah.
So
question mark.
Again, it comes back to the fact base, and I think the commissioner should have showed a little bit greater discretion and judgment. It feels like to me along the line, and certainly speaking to her own officers.
Blame the woman. You're blaming the woman on this one.
I'm not trying to blame the woman, but I'm saying bad idea to get on that call. She took it all
on herself, Lisa. She took it all on herself. The way the thing went down yesterday, she's basically said
she did.
Yeah.
Yeah, she has. Yeah, there's no question about it. And Sheena probably knows that she is, as I said, I don't think she makes it of this as the commissioner, and that's just the way it is. Scott, you said something in there that caused me to think of something else, and I've lost it because I was just dazzled by what you were saying and your conclusions on it.
It was probably that episode of Love Boat that Brooke Convey was on,
Now it's gone.
A lot of times people...
Now I've got the theme in my head. Thanks so much.
Exciting and new.
Exciting and new. Yeah. See, I'm done now for the rest of the show. Good luck. But it's all a bit of a mess. I know what I was going to say. So if it wasn't that bad, if there wasn't a little bit of concern about what happened, why did Justice not send the documents over when they were first asked to produce all documents that showed these notes and this train of emails? Why did the commission have to ask for it again? So someone knew it smelled. Again,
they're probably trying
government.
Right. That could be a bunch of things. First of all, it could be justice being justice. Second of all, because they just go, nope, we're lawyers, and the answer is no to everything until you force us to our faces up against a cheese grater, and we finally say, okay, then maybe a little.
Yeah, but in a mass casualty investigation, come on.
Or it's risk management, and that's what happens, right? And then people start saying, well, you know what? Don't do that. Even though there's nothing bad about making this step, it may lead to another step, and then we won't be able to control it. So let's see if we can smother the flicker now before it becomes a flame. So that's entirely possible.
They left 4 pages out, and it made it look as if there weren't 4 pages missing. That's a problem.
Yeah.
Never the crime, it's the cover-up, right?
Too cute.
So, Lisa, Scott says, it's the end of July. Rogers was there getting hammered by the committee. The Pope's going around the country, apologizing on behalf of some unnamed other people. And so Scott's saying this doesn't really matter politically. I have a little theory. About these things, that there's a lot of these things that don't become the thing, but they're noticed. And I always think that from the time a government gets elected, it starts putting bricks down in a wall that will ultimately defeat it, with apologies to Pink Floyd. And this is another brick in that wall. This is just something, nobody will ever raise this at the door in the election. This will never be an issue in the election. But has it gone into the general maw of how people think about the government and consider the government? Yes, I think it has.
I would agree, especially in Nova Scotia. This is probably not playing well at all down there. That being said, who knows? I mean, as I said, I was part of the SNC-Lavalin. I thought I did a pretty good job cross-examining, and I got no benefit and no win in the next election as a result of it. Right? I lost my seat. So I don't know about that, David. This government is very, very different. Trudeau's very, very different in terms of stuff sticking to him.
The unicorn. All right.
Wait. I got one more thing because you can't sort of just drive by and say Scott said this didn't matter and would have no political consequence. That's not what I said. I was offering you my take on what I thought based on what my takeaway was on it. But I do think I agree with you. I just want to say you can't find here in Toronto, not in Nova Scotia, here in Toronto, if you find 4 people who know about this, and that's not easy, but if you find 4 people who know about this, you won't find a single one of them who will go to any length to give the benefit of the doubt to the government. They just say, they put it in a context of all politicians and this government in particular, they're fucking around, they're behind it and all that sort of stuff. So I do think it has a cumulative impact, right? Mm-hmm. And, just like that hotel in Shawinigan didn't seem to hurt Chrétien at the moment, but it sure rolled up on his shore over time. And when sponsorship came around, that legacy, it had removed some of the scales from his hide.
Despite
as a conservative,
the extremely official bill of sale. Okay.
What was that called? White?
I don't remember.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
I don't remember.
All right.
Today, Herle Burleyites, I'm going to take you back to 1912 and a most cautionary tale. The Titanic, a story and shipwreck that's been literally explored, from every angle. Almost. There's a link between this tragedy and modern wireless spectrum policy you're probably not aware of. And it reveals why it's so important to get that policy right. I tell it on behalf of our presenting sponsor, TELUS. Spectrum, you'll recall, are the radio frequencies upon which wireless data travels. When Titanic set sail from Southampton, it had on board the latest in communication technology, Marconi's wireless telegraph. If you saw the film, and honestly, who didn't? It plays a prominent role. Marconi's system used long radio wavelengths that didn't travel very far and were highly susceptible to interference. Other, more efficient, shorter wave technologies were available at the time, but Marconi's company had capitalized on the luxury market for what was still considered non-essential communications at sea. Radio frequencies were often jammed, used for personal messages sent from the Titanic and every other ship. There wasn't even a standardized distress call that all vessels used. To use the colloquialism, it was the Wild West, but at sea. In fact, the closest ship, the SS Californian, had already sent a transmission warning it was surrounded by ice. But Titanic's wireless operator was so overwhelmed with a long queue of personal messages, he didn't pay it proper heed. There are other details I don't have time here to recount, but you all know how it ends. What's critical was there was no regulation to any of this. Soon afterward, governments began to regulate and divvy up spectrum for different uses, maritime, military, and media, prioritizing some for necessary communications like distress calls. If you've been listening to our stories from TELUS, and especially as digital technologies continue to advance, getting spectrum policy right is even more important in how we all thrive today, economically, socially, environmentally. We'll continue with Chapter 3, a compelling economic story, next week. Robin Urbach, a caustic columnist from the Globe and Mail, wrote a piece about the NDP, and it was caustic. Here's an excerpt from it. For a disciplined, pragmatic, and imaginative New Democratic Party, this could be a summer of opportunity. While Canadian workers are being crushed by inflation at a 39-year high, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is touring the country, gluing popsicle sticks together at summer camp. While hospitals across the country are collapsing under long forecasted pressures, Mr. Trudeau and his provincial counterparts are squabbling over healthcare jurisdiction. While the country tries to navigate yet another COVID-19 wave, Ottawa reinstates seemingly useless airport mitigation measures. There is thus an opportunity for a classical type of NDP, one that speaks the language of blue-collar workers, union members, young families and the like, to channel the frustrations of average Canadians who feel left behind, those who are struggling to fill up their gas tanks and stretch their grocery dollars while the Prime Minister samples cherries at a BC farm. The climate is just right for the NDP to come forward with bold ideas to address the frustrations plaguing Canadians this summer. An organized NDP would seize this opportunity, though Mr. Singh's NDP might just let it drift on by. Lisa, what do you think about that?
I don't think she's wrong. I'm completely befuddled by the lack of voice I'm hearing from the NDP all summer. And you're right. She's right. These pocketbook issues are a killer. Imagine if you're going out to renew your mortgage right now and you are faced with a jump from about 1.5%, if you were lucky 5 years ago to get that price, but at least you're getting under 2%. And now you're looking at 5.5 and 6. Huge bite out of your take-home pay, massive bite out of what you have. And as a result, this is where the NDP should come in, and they are not. So what's going on? Leadership. He is out of touch. He's out of touch. He's not getting it. And they need to have a serious look in the mirror as the NDP as to who they are and what they stand for. And maybe they're going to try to get some bump when we, I guess Andrea Horwath is going to run for mayor in Hamilton. It's being announced. It's being announced at some point in time. Maybe announced already. I didn't catch the news
today. I think, yeah.
Today, okay.
I think so.
Maybe they're hoping that she's going to carry the brand forward in terms of talking about the pocketbook issues, and maybe Mr. Singh will then jump on the bandwagon and go with it. But holy mackerel, man, what an opportunity for these guys. And they're not there because they're leaving the ground to Pierre Poilievre.
What is their problem, Scott? Like, why do they have such trouble grasping onto what seem to be obvious class-based economic issues? Should be naturals for them.
Yeah, I don't really know the answer to that question. I think the obvious answer has to be leadership. It has to be wired right into the leader and what he wishes to prioritize and where he wishes to focus. I mean, there's what other explanation can there be? Because if he wanted to do it, he would be doing it. And if his team, who I assume are saying we should be seizing these opportunities, is offering that recommendation and they're not doing it, it's because he doesn't decide to proceed with that advice. Like, I think the NDP, they look like a party on pause, right? They did this confidence and supply agreement. And since then, they'll pop up every once in a while when challenged and say, listen, we are in the business of getting tangible outcomes for Canadians. The agreement's going to force, we're going to get dental, we're going to get this, we're going to get that, and then we're going to be able to campaign on that. That's what Jack did. He secured, benefits out of a minority government. Then he was able to demonstrate that he had value, and he went on to pick up seats. I don't think that formula is a correct reading of history. I don't think it's a wise political strategy. And I'm with you. I don't understand. I don't understand the Prime Minister's summer tour at all. And I've mentioned that before on here. I just think, I think her characterization of the tour is largely correct, Robbins, in her column. And I find it puzzling. But the NDP surely should be looking at that vacancy on these bread and butter issues, combined with Poilievre, and where a conservative is going for the lunch bucket vote, and saying to themselves, we have got to reconnect with working people. We've got to reconnect with people who hold private sector union cards, much less public sector union cards. And I don't see any of that. You know me, I've been saying for 2 years, if I was running the NDP, I'd say, let's start with one square on the board. And the first square we should start with is reconnecting to labor. And I don't see them doing that. So I don't know where they're at.
So let me introduce a wrinkle. Let me introduce a wrinkle, because you may know that in my spare time when I'm not podcasting, I'm in the polling business.
Yeah.
And people are desperate financially right now. People are like the number of people who are actually worried about whether or not they can afford to feed their family is now at 24%, twice what it was 2 years ago. Twice what it was 2 years ago.
Wow.
Okay. So huge economic anxieties out there. I'm wondering if there isn't an ideological problem for both the NDP and the Liberals, because you know what those working class people want right now, Scott? A tax cut. They want a tax cut. They support dental care. They support anything you'll do to improve the healthcare system. They support childcare. Sure, all those things are good things to have, but they're not addressing the affordability crisis as far as people are concerned. Yeah. Right? And if you say that they are, you're just going to offend people. The Liberals have to get off this childcare, dental care message about affordability. So really, what people want, they've got they've got the Bank of Canada taking cash out of one pocket, and they've got inflation taking cash out of the other pocket. They want some cash.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, of course they do. It's a big problem. Forget the NDP, for the government. It's a huge problem because they're so tone deaf on it. And I agree with you. And I think they'll buckle. I think they will end up in September, October, when they can no longer resist this, and the political pressure of it is undeniable and it's overwhelming them. They'll switch and say, okay, well, we're gonna take action, and then they'll end up in the worst of all possible worlds. They probably won't get any credit for it, and they'll encounter a ton of skepticism. But I'm with you. That's exactly my reading, and the reason, and it's important for Liberals in Ottawa to understand this. The reason that's how people come down on this is that when you tell them we have a government program that is going to deliver benefits to you, people say maybe. If I give you full benefit of the doubt, somewhere down the road, possibly in a way that will feel indirect to me, possibly I'll be a beneficiary and an accountant might be able to point it out to me, when I file my taxes. But a tax cut doesn't require me to make any assumptions. I know I get some relief. I can see that less is taken from me, and I don't have to rely on government to eventually give something more back to me. And that's why people want that. Faced with the urgency of the cost of living crisis, they want an equally urgent response. And the government is, showing up to a baseball game with a hockey stick, and it's just really, really bad politics.
Yeah. So here's, I believe that the NDP will pop up before the end of the summer, but it's not going to be against the Liberals. When we sat in Parliament, I always found it very interesting that we would have the Liberals on the ropes as opposition, and we would want the NDP to follow up our line of questioning with a line of questioning that was going to, buttress what we were saying on our side. And what would they do? They would turn around and attack the Conservatives, and we would go, come on, guys, get the plot. So what I predict the NDP will do this summer is they will go on a full score attack.
Jack Layton would have been your Huckleberry.
That's right.
So I think that they're going to attack the Conservatives and Pierre Poilievre, and that's how they're going to come out swinging. They're going to fight them instead of fighting the government. And the next election, to the point of affordability, I could see the Conservatives running on the notion: were you better off 10 years ago than you are today? And that's going to be easy because it's going to be about how much money you have in your pocket.
Can I ask you guys both a question? Do you think that the CNS agreement has a pernicious effect on the willingness of the NDP to be heavily and directly critical of the government? Insofar as, if you're really going to light the government up this summer and say, you guys are not doing what you need to do to provide people with relief, do they not put themselves in the awkward spot of then people saying, well, listen, you're the ones that are walking them to the market in a wagon. So it
happens to them every time they say something on Twitter. Right. They get that pushback.
So that's Twitter. Is that real life? But does it start to condition?
In real life, they're absent from the debate. At least there's a tweet out there. In the real world, nobody's heard anything from the NDP in months.
Right.
Yeah.
But do you think that's happening? Psychologically, do they say to themselves, well, we've got to be careful. We can't push too hard or people are going to point out that we're propping them up?
I think what you said is exactly true. One of you said it, which is the Jack Layton plan. We're going to prove that we can be government and that we're responsible with power. And that's really in the back of their heads. And I agree with you as well. I don't think it's going to work this time and lead them to the promised land. But it comes down to leadership, guys. It's just he's just not there. He's not there for them.
So it sort of feels like everything is falling apart, doesn't it? Labor and material shortages are wrecking our whole idea of normal. Airports are understaffed and clogged. The government has just ordered mobile chairs so people in line at passport offices can sit. Hospitals are understaffed and jammed. International supply lines are stretched and sclerotic. And thanks to Russian aggression, the world's food supply is severely disrupted. Well, our sponsor, CN, is doing its bit for the normal we all want to see return. The railway is now current on its grain shipments and has been since last spring. That's industry talk for on schedule, no backlogs. And to ensure cargo keeps moving smoothly as we head into fall and winter, CN is spending some serious money. In Alberta, $365 million. That means installing tens of thousands of new railway ties and miles of new track, replacing 56 road crossings, and upgrading bridges, culverts, signal systems, and other infrastructure that ensures trains run on time. In Manitoba, the same sort of work to the tune of $160 million. In Saskatchewan, $185 million. CN will be replacing 151,000 railroad ties in my home province, incidentally. That's a whole lot of logs. And in BC, $390 million. Same deal. Further, CN is extending sidings between Winnipeg and Edmonton, starting similar projects at the ports of Prince Rupert and Vancouver, and double-tracking key sections of its western network. In plain English, that means giving one train a place to park and make way for a train coming in the opposite direction. In even plainer English, CN is making maximum effort to ensure cargo moves safely and on schedule. Obviously, weather is a big factor, and last year was brutal. But CN is determined that those things within its control are copacetic. That's a promise. Since we're talking about leadership, let's go to the big show. The big show, there's been a lot of change there since we last talked to this group of people, and there's been a lot happening this week. Yesterday, there was an Angus Reid poll that showed perhaps more potential for Herle to win an election than Poilievre. It was more dramatic than a previous Abacus poll, but similar trends. Poilievre collapses the PPC, but can't attract a Liberal swing vote. Herle grows the PPC, but pulls wayward Liberals in Ontario, Quebec, and Atlantic Canada. Poilievre's campaign doesn't let that poll last one day's news cycle before they put out Stephen Harper's endorsement of Poilievre to shake up the news. Herle needed this poll months ago. Herle needed this poll at a minimum when people were still selling memberships, but probably even when people were aligning about where they were going to go. This is the core of his argument, but I think it's come too late. What do you think, Lisa?
I think the poll is just showing in numbers exactly what everybody thought and was talking about from the beginning. You know, that Pierre can win the party, but can he win the country? And Herle has a better chance of attracting voters in Atlantic Canada, Quebec, and Ontario. I mean, that's always been the contention that's been made, and now numbers come out to support it. Mr. Harper coming out is very interesting, but my take on it isn't that it was for any purpose to help Pierre win. I still believe, like Scott says, that Pierre has the numbers to win. I think this was about a first ballot win, a significant first ballot win to put all the red Tories back into their place to say, hey, the membership has spoken and this is the path we're going forward on. So getting a 65% on a first ballot is a real big indication that the party's going in the Pierre Poilievre direction. And that's, I think, what that was about, because there's a lot of people who may be thinking about Herle, but are still enamored with Mr. Harper and think he is the father of the party and he's the one that we should be listening to. And some of that support for not only for Herle may go over to Pierre, but also from Scott Aitchison and from Roman and from oh my gosh, I can't remember help me out, guys.
Leslie
Who's
Lewis.
the fourth candidate? Leslie Lewis. Oh, sorry about that. Or Leslie Lewis. Maybe the first vote's going to change in one of those guys, not necessarily just Herle.
You know, Lisa, I want to get back to the poll, but just on terms of Harper, I'm unaware of any previous leader of any political party who's endorsed a candidate for their succession.
Is that right?
Really? I'd have to go back. Joe Clark never did?
No.
You guys would know more so than I did because you're a student of politics.
No. I know no Liberal leader has, and I don't believe any Conservative leader has, and I'm pretty sure no NDP leader has ever publicly said anything about who should replace them.
No question. Mr. Harper always had affection for Pierre. Like, there's no question about that. That is longstanding. So is it affection for Pierre or is it dislike for Herle? Is it calculated so that he wins on first ballot versus, oh my gosh, we really need to shore up what's going on because we didn't like that poll? I mean, those are things to ask Jenny, to be honest. You know, what was the motivation for putting it out today? But I think the impact will be some of those people are going to start thinking, maybe I will give Pierre my number one vote because I want the party to be united. Look, this is what the boss said. So we should go in the direction of what the boss said. However, if I were the Liberals, would I be saying, uh-oh, guess who's back?
Scott, doesn't Harper have to let this party go at some point?
Yeah, I'm not sure that, if I agree with you, it was an atypical move. It probably is only of concern and interest to people like us, who note that it seems ahistorical in its precedent. But, I'm not sure that it means he's not letting go of the party. I think that I think it's a last push. Like, I think it's like him on the dock, pushing the boat off as hard as he can, saying, 15 years ago, 16 years ago, we started this project, and it was to create a new conservative party. And I have a point of view of what that party is like. And it is a lot less like, some warmed over version of what Stanfield stood with and stood for. Like, I'm for this, so I'm putting my stamp on this. Pierre Poilievre is taking the direction that I prefer. That's what I think modern conservatives ought to be. And so I think that he just wanted to get his oar in the water and did so only after it was clear that Pierre was going to win. Maybe it has a first ballot effect. I think that's an interesting take, a really interesting take that hadn't occurred to me. But I just think he wanted to just get on the record that this is the officially approved, signed, sealed, and delivered version of the Conservative Party that I have always wanted and stood for. And I, by the way, am the Sir John A. of this party. And so that's what I thought it was about. I did think it was weird. Like, the video is a little weird, don't you think? Like, it's sort of like it's kind of like it's weird, right? It's like,
not surprising. It's not surprising.
But it's like it's like Captain America and Black Widow break into like a secret military installation, and when they hit the computers, this big video screen comes up, and it's like, I haven't spoken to you in this way for many years. Welcome. I wish to control the future from software land. Right? It was very kind of like, woo, like Max Headroom, Baron Zemo, kind of weird. Yeah, I don't know that it's that Harper can't let go. I think that it's that Harper remains actively interested, and he. But
that's the same thing. That is the same thing.
I think that it's his project, and he wants it to go, and he wants people to know that he wants it to go in that direction. It's going to go there because Pierre is going to win, and he wants people to know that that's a correct direction in his view. He doesn't want to just applaud it when it occurs. I don't think it's so much about spite against Herle. Like, I don't think it's fun to say that, but I don't really think he's just, firing up the iPhone so he can kick him in the nuts. I think he wants to say, this is the party that I created and that I want to see. And this is the future I want to see for it.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's get back to the poll. Let's get back to the poll, which is interesting, because first of all, Scott, under Charest, Angus Reid says the Liberal vote can fall down to 25 points.
Yeah.
Right. There is. Whether it's Charest or Poilievre, I think there's a notion there about how solid our vote is at the current time. If you can throw a name in there and drop our vote down to 25 points, a name that people don't know all that well.
And these are decided voters, right?
Yeah.
These are decided voters. So this is your party.
This worries the shit out of me. I am very worried that people will read this poll, a lot of Liberals, a lot of Ottawa Liberals, and will say, see, all these panicking pennies like Scott Reid have been saying we need to be out there, kneecapping Poilievre and intervening in this race and getting our oar in the water and talking about this. They're all wrong. The guy's taking care of himself. He's demonstrating that he has a high floor, low ceiling, that his coalition is limited, blah, 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 blah. I think they're taking exactly the wrong lesson from this. I think what this tells us is how desperately low the party's vote seems to be just as default, somewhere between 30 and 34%. Which is too low, particularly when, and that it can easily be argued, as you say, all the way down to 25. And I just look at it, and also just at a top level, it's just one poll, but even Pierre Poilievre is beating the Liberals. The abstract notion of Pierre Poilievre is beating the Liberals. And so I say, again, Liberals, you got to be better. right?
Well, it's not. I mean, it's interesting, Scott, right, that you put Poilievre's name in, and Liberals think he's so offensive to centrist voters that you'd expect to see the Liberal numbers soar up into the high 30s against Poilievre, but you don't.
You do not. And here's the other thing. This is one Polaroid picture of right now. So think about 9 months from now, and if cost of living hasn't abated, and he switched from convoy and vaccine mandates and those things that cause a lot of discomfort among lots of different groups of voters. And that's kind of something that's, back in the background, but people haven't talked about. And instead, he's all pounding away on bread and butter economic issues with the same vitriol, the same sort of, hey, populist parade, let's get the torches and the pitchforks out. But it's focused on that, which has a much broader appeal and be a lot more resonant with people. At that point, it's going to be that much harder for the Liberals to say, yeah, but don't forget, this is the guy who was also about those things. So I just come back to my same old standard. We Liberals need to be pounding on this guy day and night, head and gut, nonstop, and defining him. Because the idea that this poll tells us that he's limited in his appeal is wrong. It's a wrong reading of this, and it's a really bad bet to make about the future.
We'd be in trouble if we were running against Candice Bergen. Because, governments don't survive inflation. Like, this government will have to be superbly agile and lucky if to get reelected after this economic environment. I just looked through modern history, which for me is 45 fucking years, and and no government has ever survived bad inflation.
For me, if you're banking on Pierre being tainted with the convoy as the way forward in 2025, I would remind you that we'll be on booster number 17 at that point in time, and it will not be mandatory. So, the lens of history is going to look a lot different in 2025 and where Pierre stood. And perhaps they're going to say, these guys weren't absolutely crazy. They weren't absolutely crazy. Their tactics were terrible, but they weren't crazy.
Put some dirt on his trouser cuffs now. Don't assume that he's limited his appeal and you can get around to doing it later. Anyway, people are bored of me saying the same damn thing.
Lisa, we tend to, and I'm lumping you in this, we tend to talk about Poilievre's coalition in an entirely negative way in terms of what he's putting together. But do you think there's any actual attribute for Canada, benefit for Canada, in a Conservative Party that can collapse the PPC movement and absorb that level of disenchantment that's out there so that it isn't festering? It feels like it has a home somewhere inside the political system. Is that of any value?
Sure. Especially since it may lead to forming of government, which I think will be beneficial for the country in general. I still think a Conservative government I think a Pierre Poilievre government is better than the current government we have. I'm going to vote Conservative in the next election. And regardless of who's the leader, I'm going to vote Conservative because I think it's the better plan. But all that being said, bringing the party together is incredibly important, not just for voting, but for melding that policy that makes sense going forward. Because as you guys point out a lot, there's a disenfranchised voice out there. And unless it finds a home and a home where it's listened to, it has a potential of spinning off into something that we just don't want. And I think the PPC is something we didn't want, quite frankly, where you have this echo chamber of the most radical talking to one another. At least in the big blue tent, you can hear differing opinions, and maybe you can find yourself to a different kind of moderated debate that makes sense instead of the debate on Twitter, which a lot of times doesn't make sense.
So if I was arguing in favor of Poilievre, one of the things I would be saying is this poll says that those voters consider the selection of Jean Charest to be a giant middle finger to them. And they all go to the PPC, and it moves up to 9-10 points in terms of national support. At the same time that the Conservative Party becomes a much more effective competitor in the centrist brokerage politics than it's been for a couple of decades under Charest. So in a sense, it is a recreation of the status quo ante prior to 1993. The question is, with the PPC out there like that, is that a sustainable circumstance, or is this new Jean Charest reconstituted Conservative Party just one election away from having reform come at it again?
Oh, I don't know if it's reform. I mean, what I'm observing is, for me, it's the vote going to Leslyn Lewis that I find the most interesting, especially given the kind of stuff that she's distributing to members about the World Economic Forum and about vaccine mandates. I mean, that I don't know if that lines up with PPC necessarily. That's another whole splinter of conservative voters out there. And they may not necessarily be the PPC folks. They may be something different that she takes with them, and depending upon where they go, do they go to the PPC? Does she go to the PPC in a Charest government? I think that is important to watch, quite frankly. There's all kinds of different factions. I firmly believe that if we get in a situation where we have somebody just winning on that final ballot, we have the I guess, the conditions for more of this nattering amongst factions than if you had a clear, decisive winner.
I have a different take, not surprisingly, but the challenge I have with the scenario you lay out, David, and the benefit of it is that it implies that the tent is big and that it's blue. It implies that when you absorb that vote, you ameliorate that vote. It implies that what Pierre Poilievre is going to be leading is a brokerage party. I don't think it actually wants to be a brokerage party. I think it wants to generate as many votes as possible. And I don't think it has any interest in being a brokerage party. And I don't think he has any interest in being a brokerage politician, defined as someone that balances a variety of interests and finds reasonable accommodation and compromise among them. I think that he is an us and them guy. I think he is a hard choice this or a hard choice that guy. And I don't think that's the function that the Conservative Party will serve under him. I don't think it will bring people in so that they can become acclimatized to a broader range of opinion and find their place in that church. Maybe they have a pew at the back or the front, but they're still there. I don't think that's what's going to happen. I think that those folks will come into the church and they will take over the choir and they will elect the deacon and they will dictate the sermon. And that's what I am afraid of.
Mm.
All right. Why don't we wrap up with our Hey Yous? Gordon, lead us out.
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
All right. Scott, you want to start?
Sure. My Hey You goes to Chrystia Freeland. Where are you? I know it's the last week of July. I know it's hotter than
Come on out.
I know it's hotter than Billy be damned, but jeepers creepers. Like, come on. You know, the Bank of Canada jacks interest rates by a full point. The Fed is going to move by at least 75 basis points this week. Cost of living is increasing. Don't tell me about gas prices are gradually drifting down. You know, the reality is that we're going to have high inflation with us for at least another 9 months. The government doesn't even talk about it. And if the notion is that we don't talk about it, then maybe we don't make it a problem. We don't make it a problem. Maybe it's not our problem is foolish. This is top of mind for people. They need leadership, not just from the Bank of Canada. They want leadership from the government. They need to hear from their finance minister. And the finance minister's job isn't just to be the minister of finance, is to be the minister of the economy and of economic well-being for everyone and all parts of the country. And I just don't hear that message. And I just think that the whole whiteboard needs to be wiped out. A new message needs to be rewritten, and it needs to be delivered with force and with frequency starting yesterday. So please finish your vacation. If you're on vacation, everybody's entitled to some time away from the job. But for God's sake, when you come back to the microphone, bring a concerted and different message.
All righty. Lisa, what do you got?
My Hey You is Rick Westhead at TSN for breaking the story on Hockey Canada and the players. And listen, guys, this is where you see the hardcore conservative in me come out. I'm a law and order conservative. And as a result, I just want to remind you that in the fall, this entire saga will be featured on Law and Order SVU. And Captain Olivia Benson will be the one to sort it all out. And she is not going to be swayed by these arguments that Hockey Canada has a bad culture and the culture's rotten and there's toxic masculinity. Great. Go figure out your organization. You know what I want to see? Charges. When a couple of hockey players who are playing in the NHL serve their time behind bars because they sexually assaulted women, that's when you're going to get the change. And that's when you're going to get the tone change for these up and coming young hockey players. That is completely unacceptable. And I'm absolutely outraged that there's a video of 2001 of probably NHL players right now allegedly sexually assaulting a woman in Halifax. And we're talking about Hockey Canada losing their funding. No way. Cops, get off your asses, for God's sake. Get out there and study this. You're shameful, absolutely shameful for allowing this to happen on the grand stage. And power and money should never buy yourself out of this absolute disgusting act, allegedly.
You're here.
Wow.
Yeah, powerful. That was very powerful. And I agree.
There's a reason why SVU is the most popular television show, right? 23 years. You know why? Because women watch it and they go, I recognize that. I've seen that happen. And how can we as a nation let this happen? Like, honestly, London, Halifax, police, get going.
Well, isn't culture even a worse argument? Oh, well, what can you do? We've got a culture.
Let's put out a statement and a 5-point plan on how to fix toxic masculinity. Frig, your parents on this board. Like, are you teaching your son that? Don't worry, I'll make a payment to the girl. She'll go away quietly. Frig off, right? Just frig off.
I think just in terms of the crafting of these things, I like how after having done everything to obscure this and prevent it from coming to public light, they issue a statement saying, we are committed to transparency and to making sure. I mean, how do people come up with these things with a straight face? It's amazing.
It's gross.
My hey you goes out to Pierre Poilievre. Premier Scott Moe of Saskatchewan is holding a series of mostly private meetings around the province designed to build support for Saskatchewan separatism, of all things. And I'd like to know what you think about that. So give us put a little Twitter video out on what you think about separatism in Saskatchewan. All right, folks, that's the Curse of Politics for today. Lisa Raitt was with us, and she'll be back next week. Holy Christmas. What a show that will be. Scott Reid, thanks for coming out again this week. Like to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our sponsor, CN, for promoting this public affairs podcast, and we'll see you all next week with more Curse of Politics.